Okay. Any questions you have? What will be a good time to make up? See, we have 6 classes to make up. Will you like to take the class test outside the class period, or you want it? So that's one way, like we can make up 2 periods. If you take the class test not within the class but outside the class period. So how many of you will like to take the test or have a serious objection? Let me put this way, have a serious objection to taking the test outside the class period.
I think we like the idea of taking it outside the class period at Wake Forest.
Okay, good. So, no, it's not take home. It's the same test as if it were in the class, but it will not be on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11:15. So it can be like. You want to say something? Do you want to say something?
No, it's all right.
Okay. So today is what, 6th? So when will you like to have the first test? There are 5 students who are in my finite element class. So they have a test on the 16th of this month. So we cannot have it on 16th. So how about 23rd or somewhere close to that? 20th. So this Friday, there is no class. The university is open, but there are no classes. And the next Friday, Thursday, finite element people have a test. So that's not good. So how about 24th?
What day of the week is
24th is a Friday. So we can have it on Saturday if you like, and I can email the test to Wake Forest and Oak Ridge. Or if you like.
Definitely not on a Saturday.
I'm sorry? Oh, that's Saturday. So how about Thursday, like 23rd? At 5 o'clock, so then there is no problem about.
The class at 5 o'clock.
Yes. Only on Thursdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Could you give it to us and we could take it when it works for us, but it would be timed so that we wouldn't all have...
No. No, I cannot do that.
Because we have to have somebody here to sit in on our test taking anyway.
So
Yeah,
after
I will
5
work-
probably won't work.
For you, I will work with Joel. So I will email the test to him, and he will work with you when to take it.
Okay.
So Wake Forest, you don't have to worry about. Oak Ridge, you don't have to worry about, because I can email the test to you, and I will trust you that you spend your 55 minutes or 60 minutes, whatever the time is. So it's for the people in Blacksburg.
Don't trust us?
No, I trust you, but I cannot give you the test and say take it home and then bring it back. So it's not the question of trusting you, So I can't really. It doesn't work out that way, right? In the system, that I say, okay, you take the test and bring it back whenever you want and bring it back. So you think about which day is good for you, and then we can discuss it on Wednesday. Okay, so yes,
Generally, how many exercises?
I do not know. All I can tell you is there will be several means more than 5 true or false or short questions. There may be as many as 20 of those. Just says like one line or 2 lines kind of deal. So they could be true or false, which means either you say yes or no, and you are done. Okay. There will be others where you have to do some work.
Can we find, for example, some theoretical question? For example,
Press that button.
So But can we find some theoretical question? For example, I just made an example. What's the definition of trajectories or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there can be theoretical question, yes. There can be question like define something, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's go back to where we were. We were trying to find how the area elements deform. So we said we took two line elements PM and PL in the reference configuration. They are deformed into P prime M prime and P prime L prime. And as one of you told me, if you take the cross product, you get the area element. So cross product means use the Kronecker delta symbol. So that's what we did. And now DAI, so we do the same thing in the present configuration. And we got a relationship between the area element in the deformed state and the area element in the undeformed state. So if you write this in the matrix form, then we can say that is dA, which is really dA1, dA2, dA3. J is the Jacobian, which is a scalar. F inverse is a matrix. Transpose of this times dA. So if you do it in the matrix notation, it will be little dA equals J F inverse transpose big dA. And in the index notation, it is dAi equal to J F inverse Si DAS. So now the question comes, if I take this body in the undeformed state and we have a unit vector n on its outer boundary. This Pierce and Fred.
I just wasn't finished writing the last line. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And some of you are wondering, how many eyes do I have? I can probably see most of you what you are doing. Okay, so now let's take a body in the reference configuration, and we have an outer unit normal n on the boundary. This is deformed into the present configuration, and this big N is deformed into little n. So our goal is to find a relationship between little n and big N. Of course, you can always say, why don't you take n equal to F inverse n? But remember, no, this n is not in the body. This vector n is not in the body. So if I ask you to find the deformed position of n, you cannot say little n equals F. You cannot say something like this, that n equals F n. This is true for every vector inside the body, but not on the surface of the body. Okay? So what we do is we basically go back to the equation we had here, the one we derived. So we take two line elements on the surface, take the cross product, and what we will get then is dAi is J F inverse Si DAS. This is the same thing as saying dA Ni. So that's the magnitude of the area times unit vector. That's perpendicular to the area now. It's perpendicular to the surface. So that equals J. And incidentally, this part is not in the book. This derivation I'm giving you now is not in the book. So dA and S, both sides I'm doing the same thing, like I'm writing the vector as its magnitude times the unit vector. So we can get then Ni equals J F inverse Si Ns dA over little dA. So if we can find this quantity, then we get a relationship between little n and big N. Does it make sense? Now, who will tell me how to find this ratio? We want to find the quantity in the box. How do we go about finding it?
Stretch of individual vectors multiplied.
And you need to press that button.
You multiply the stretches for each of the two vectors together.
Multiply the stretches. The answer is on the sheet. Or the step. Most of the information is on the screen. So, and there is no stretch on the screen. Is the question clear? We want to find the quantity in the box, like big dA over little dA. So how do we go about finding it? Yes, please.
It equals 1 over J times F inverse SI.
No, see, to find little n, I need to get rid of this quantity. But that gives me what I have written here. It doesn't give me this ratio, dA over big dA. Now when I'm going to write it, you are going to kick yourself and say, hey, why didn't we think of it? dA square equals dAi dAi. Like the magnitude of a vector, the length of a vector equals dAx square plus dAy square plus dAz square root. So this is, so you plug in J, F inverse, Si, dAs, J, F inverse, Li, dAl. Does it make sense? So one is this dAi, the other is this dAi. And you cannot use S again because then you will have S 4 times coming in a term. So we get J square F inverse Si Ns F inverse Li Nl dA square. Because each dA is the magnitude times the unit vector. Therefore, dA square over big dA square equals J square now this quantity F inverse Si and F inverse Li, the ones I have underlined, I is summed. That means there's matrix multiplication involved. So this is C inverse. Whether you can write SL or LS makes no difference because it is symmetric. So it's SL, NS, NL. And that gives you the ratio D little a over D big DA. So we get Ni equal to F inverse Si NS. So if you substitute for dA over little dA, you get 1 over C inverse. I cannot use S again because I already have an S here. So we are going to change this S to M. So we have C inverse ML NM NL square root. Okay, is it clear why this relation n equal to f n did not work? Yes?
Where did the J go? You have J squared.
Yeah. Oh, could you please press that button there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. Thank you. J square cancelled because there's a J here, and you will get 1 J in the denominator. So that gives you a relationship between the unit normal to the surface in the deformed and undeformed states. Okay, now let's go further. We have talked about changes in vectors, changes in area elements. Now let's talk about changes in volume elements. So to find the change in volume element, so we take 3 vectors at a point, so PL, PM, and PN. Probably the sketch is not very good. PN is not quite parallel to PL, so maybe I should have drawn N like this. So this is deformed, and we get P prime, L prime, M prime, and N prime. So how do I get the volume of the parallelopiped spanned by vectors PL, PM, and PN in the reference configuration? We want to find the volume of the, it's not quite cube because PL, PM, PN may not be of the same length and they may not be mutually perpendicular. Okay, so we want to find the volume of this parallelepiped. And you have studied this in your vector algebra class. You should have studied. And Josh is smiling because I said you should have studied, right? So anyone will tell me what you, yes?
PL cross PM dot PN.
Very good. So take the scalar triple product. So take the scalar triple product. So you get Pn dotted with PL cross PM. Means doesn't matter which one, how you take the scalar triple product. Now in terms of our index notation, so this will be equal to what? This is the permutation symbol. So it's A, B, C, PNA, PLB, PMC. These A, B, C are indices. These are not tensors. These are like subscripts. These are indices. So what about the volume element in the deformed state? Same way. In the deformed state, we take the scalar triple product between P prime N prime, P prime L prime, and P prime M prime. So it will be epsilon I j k P prime L prime I, P prime M prime j, P prime N prime k. And as I said before, the order in which you write does not make any difference for the scalar triple product. So long as you go from left to right or right to left, you are okay. Now we want to find the relationship between little dv and big dv. So we want to find how the volume element big dv, the small volume element big dv, is changed into little dv, and what is the relationship between the two. Okay, so that's what we are shooting for. So to get that, so this is FIA, PLA, FJB, PMB, FKC, PNC. Because P prime L prime equals F times PL. P prime L prime equals F operating upon PL. Does it make sense? Now, let's look at this. This quantity in the box, epsilon ijk, FIA, FJB, FKC. And you have learned this, you actually did a homework problem. This was your second homework, I don't know, exercise 2, like a problem number 2. And we used it last time also. So what is this equal to? The quantity in the box, epsilon ijk, FIA, FJB, FKC. Yes, good. That?
J times epsilon ABC.
Very good. Not quite, but it's okay. So this is epsilon J time, no, this is epsilon A, B, I think this is what you said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you were right. Sorry, you were right. Yes. J times epsilon ABC. J is Jacobian, which is determinant of F. J is the Jacobian. He was right. So I misunderstood when he spoke. My fault. So PLA, PMB, PNC. So Mr. Kunz at Oak Ridge. So what is this quantity equal to? Again in the box.
Okay.
Kunz?
That would be
The hint is answer is on this screen.
right. Okay, so that will be dV, capital V.
Yeah, that's capital dV. Okay, so that's the way we started with dV equal to that. So this is equal to J times big dV. So the relationship between little dV and big dV is that little dV equals J times big dV. So if you take a volume element in the reference configuration like this, dV, it is deformed into little dV, and the two are related by this. Okay?
Suppose J is equal to 1.
I'm coming to that. Good. Supposing J equal to 1, what will happen? Undeformed and deformed values are the same. Which material have you learned? And I bet with you, you have learned. Which material have you learned for which there is no change in volume? Yes, Josh?
Incompressible.
Incompressible. But what is the name of that material? Any specific fluid? Pardon me?
Water.
No. That fluid is in this room also. At least at two places I see. Water. So water is generally assumed to be incompressible. Anything else you know of that is considered as incompressible? And I can again assure you that most of you, I cannot say all of you, most of you know that material, use it. Without that, you will not be living. Yes?
Air with Mach number less than 0.3.
Air is generally not, no, air is assumed to be compressible.
But if the Mach number is less than 0.3,
I'm sorry?
Mach number.
No, even if its Mach number is less than 0.3, I think you generally assume air to be compressible. Generally. This is something different. And it is a solid. And all of us have it. Wake Forest? Anyone from Wake Forest? Human skin. Yeah, we assume it to be incompressible. Also the rubber in the tires in your car. The rubber in your tires, the rubber in the tires on your car is assumed to be incompressible. Okay? So a material for which there is no change in volume is called incompressible. And for us, that incompressibility condition will be J equal to 1. The incompressibility condition is J equal to 1, but that's not what you learn in fluid mechanics. Okay, in fluid mechanics, you did not say incompressibility condition is J equal to 1. So let's go to fluid mechanics now. So if I differentiate both sides with respect to time, again we have this bad habit of using a superimposed dot to indicate the time derivative, keeping big X fixed. So this means d over dt of J, big X fixed, so this will be 0. So J dot should be 0. This is not what fluid mechanics people say either, because if you go to any of my colleagues, say Professor Kramer or Tilianos or Mark Stamler, they won't like you were saying J dot equal to 0 is incompressibility condition. They want to see in terms of velocity field. Because in fluid mechanics, we don't talk about displacements, we talk about velocities. Okay, so let's try to speak their language now. So J which is a determinant, is epsilon A, B, C, F1A, F2B, F3C. So this is a determinant of F. So instead of like expanding that determinant, writing all those terms, I can write it in this form. So I'm expanding with respect to, say, first row. Previously we wrote L, M, N, but now I'm taking L equal to 1, M equal to 2, and N equal to 3. So J equal to that. So if you differentiate with respect to time, keeping big X fixed, so we get, remember on the right hand side, A and B and C are sum. So this is really the sum of 27 terms, but many of them are zeros. But this is sum of 27 terms. So it will be F dot 1A, F2B, F3C plus F1A, F dot 2B, F3C plus F1A, F2B, F dot 3C. Chain rule of calculus, right? This is product of three functions. So you differentiate one at a time. So let's look at the first one. Maybe before I do that, let me first say what is F dot 1A. So that is delta over delta T of F1A, keeping big X fixed, what is F1? That's delta little x1 over delta big XA. By definition, again keeping big X fixed. But partial derivatives commute. Partial derivatives commute. I think now you ask me the question. So you tell me, what is this equal to?
Yeah. That's the velocity.
That's the velocity. Because he asked me, what is the trajectory? Trajectory is the path followed by a particle. So this is the time rate of change of the position. So that is the V1, one component of velocity. So that is equal to delta V1 over delta XA so far we are taking V, the velocity, as a function of big X and time. But our fluid mechanics colleagues don't like that. They want velocity to be expressed as a function of little x and time, the spatial position. Because when you take measurements in the wind tunnel, you are not looking at a particle. You are looking at that particle which happens to be at this location when you took the picture. And if you take the picture after a microsecond, different particles will come there. So if you express V1 as a function of little x, then we have to use the chain rule again. We have to use the chain rule of calculus again. So it's delta V1 over delta XJ, delta XJ over delta XA. Remember, this is sum of three terms. Chain rule, I mean, we are using calculus, I guess it's 101, right? Because you learned the chain rule of calculus in your first course. So that's all we are doing, chain rule of calculus. Okay, now, so let's evaluate this term there. So let's evaluate the first term we have. So epsilon A, B, C, F dot 1A, F2B, F3C. So let's evaluate this term. So this is equal to epsilon A, B, C, F dot 1A we just found out. So this is, if you don't mind, I'm going to write delta V1, well, okay, let me go ahead and write. Delta V1 over delta Xj. What is Fj? This term delta Xj over delta Xa is Fja. And then I copy F2b and F3c. Okay, so now if you look at this quantity in the box, which Fred already told us, what is this equal to, like 5 minutes ago. So this is equal to Jacobian epsilon j to c, no, j to 3 delta V1 over delta Xj. So the quantity in the box is this, Jacobian times epsilon j to 3, right? Because you told us like FJA, FKB, FLC, but now the other two indices are 2 and 3. Remember, it is summed on J. So how many terms do we have on the right hand side? It is summed on J. So how many terms do we have on the right hand side? Yes.
We have 3 there, and then we got 6 more from the
No,
rest.
just stay here. So how many do we have? 3. Out of those 3, how many are zeros? See, when j is 2, we will have epsilon 2 to 3. But epsilon, if any two indices on epsilon are same, then it is 0. So this thing is equal to j delta V1 over delta X1. Right? So it's equal to j delta V1 over delta X1. Similarly, we can go to this second term and show that this is equal to j delta V2 over delta X2. It's the same procedure, same steps. So the end result is going to be that j dot equal to j delta V1 over delta X1 plus second term will give us delta V2 over delta X2 plus delta V3 over delta X3. And how can we write delta V1 over delta X1 plus delta V2 over delta X2 plus delta V3 over delta X3 in shorthand, like using our index notation? Delta Vi over delta Xi. Or, so this is delta Vi over delta Xi, which is the same thing as saying this is divergence of velocity field. So j dot equals j times divergence of velocity field. That's always true. Okay, that's a relation which is always true. Okay? Now, if the material is incompressible, if the material is incompressible, then J is, actually what we really should say the following. A motion or a deformation for which little dv is equal to big dv is called isochoric. So if I ask you in the exam what is an isochoric deformation, you should answer little dv equal to big dv all the time or everywhere. A deformation for which little dv equals big dv all the time and everywhere is called isochoric. An incompressible material can have only isochoric deformations. A compressible material can have both isochoric and non-isochoric deformations. So it's one-way street. An incompressible material can have only isochoric deformations, but a compressible material can have both isochoric as well as non-isochoric deformations. So in an isochoric deformation then, little dv equals big dv, j equal to 1. All these are equivalent. Little dv equals big dv is the same thing as saying Jacobian equal to 1. You don't have to say and. Okay, this is really or. Or j dot is zero, or so if j dot is 0, what else can we say? Pardon? Divergence of V is 0. And if your fluid mechanics colleagues will like this part, the divergence of velocity is 0. Solid mechanics people will like j equal to 1 or little dv equal to big dv. So all of these are equivalent. There is an or in between. There is no and in between. Okay? Or means give any one of these conditions. So the deformation is isochoric if and only if little dv equals big dv, or j equal to 1, or j dot equal to 0, or divergence of velocity field equal to 0. And so all of these are equivalent. Okay, now I think you might have heard of something like this, conservation of mass. Incidentally, this equation, divergence of V equal to 0, is also called continuity equation in fluid mechanics. Okay. Continuity equation for incompressible fluids. I don't want to use the word incompressible flows. That's quite often used in the fluid mechanics literature, but a material is incompressible, not a flow. So that's the way I was taught, so I'm not going to use the word incompressible flow. So a material is incompressible, but not a flow is incompressible. Incompressibility is a property of the material. Okay, so what is conservation of mass? Certainly conservation of mass does not apply to us, because our mass, which means our weight, changes almost every day. It changes in the morning, it's different in the morning, it's different in the evening. So, but the continuous media we are going to study, for them, what we are going to assume is the following, that if you take any small portion, and assume that no material is flowing in or out of this, so you can like take this piece in imagination, you can cut it and put red dye on it, permanent dye. So put it back in the body. You take this chunk out, in imagination of course, take this chunk out, color the surface with permanent dye, say red color dye, put this specimen back, now deform it. So after you deform it, the shape of this chunk of material will change. You take out that same chunk of material again with that red color on it, you will see that the mass has not changed. So that's what we mean by conservation of mass. So mass of a material, we are not doing relativistic mechanics. We are not using E equal to mc square. Speeds we are considering are much, much, much lower than the speed of light. Okay, we are living on Earth, not in space. So we are nowhere close to the speed of light. You are not studying electromagnetism or relativistic theory. Because in relativistic theory, the speeds can be as high as the speed of light, and whatever we are studying will not apply. It certainly will not apply. Okay? So hypersonic speed is okay. That's only saying like it's more than 1,000 feet per second. It's like more than 1,000 feet per second is 1/5 of a kilometer per 1/5 of a mile per second. It's okay. A mile per second is okay. Speed of light is 3 times 10 to the power 10 centimeters per second. So long as you are 1/1,000,000th of that, you are okay. Okay, now, so I take this chunk of material, find its mass. So let's assume delta m is its mass. And the volume of this chunk of material is, if I'm in the reference configuration, is big delta V. The assumption we make in continuum mechanics is, and that's where the rarefied, the thin gases don't come. We cannot apply this theory to thin gases. Air is okay, but if you go like 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers above the Earth's surface, this assumption may or may not be valid. So the assumption is that if you take this limit exists. So you cannot think about crystal structure. If you are in material science and engineering department, like MSc, and say, oh, I'm going to take one atom, or I'm going to take the volume which does not contain any atom, our theory will not apply. So if you are looking at crystals, you have to look at it from a distance. Like you are flying in the airplane and you are looking at a crystal on the ground, you really don't see atoms spread around. You see chunk of material. Same thing about cells. Like if you look at one cell in the body, we are out of luck. But if you look at a collection of cells, we are okay. So it depends upon the scale at which you are looking at. And we denote this limit by the Greek symbol rho and call it mass density. And in the reference configuration, we will denote the mass density by rho 0. The assumptions are mass is positive, volume is positive. Even if you take the limit, as volume goes to 0, you get positive value, no matter how small delta V is. Okay? So this is classical continuum mechanics that was discovered or maybe 2 centuries ago. Because I mean, it happened to me when I started teaching this class like 10, 15 years ago. A professor from geology department sent me a note. He said the title of the course is Introduction to Continuum Mechanics. So why don't you teach maths first? Like, why don't you teach linear algebra and then calculus and then teach continuum mechanics? So my response was that Introduction to Continuum Mechanics means we will teach something that was discovered 200 years ago, not 10 years ago. So the linear algebra and calculus is a prerequisite for this course. It's not a core requisite. Syllabus doesn't say we will teach this in the class. It says you should have learned that before. Learned, not taken the course. So anyway, so this limit exists and we assume it is positive. So this mass density is positive. So now, if we deform this, and as I said, when you deform it, the shape changes and its volume changes too. The shape changes and the volume changes. Oh, but just please give me 1 more minute because I see that I'm out of time. I did not look at the watch. Okay, so its volume changes and mass density changes. So the conservation of mass means that if you find its mass in the deformed state, so that's mass density times volume, that will be the same as the original mass. So that's what conservation of mass means, that the mass is not destroyed, it's neither created nor destroyed. And since we know that little dv is j times big dv, I'm done. Just all I have to do is cancel out dv on both sides. So what we get then is that that rho j equals rho 0. So the conservation of mass means rho j equal to rho 0. And I will continue from there, this point on Wednesday. Okay, so see you on Wednesday. And all of you should have gotten the homework assignment. And I'm told one problem is repeated.
Excuse me, can I ask you a question? Is the word axial straight